So we're back on the step side, and we need some gauges for it. I'm going to do the electrical separate. I'm going to make a separate video for the gauges because I'm making a custom set. There's so much that goes into it. Everything from the custom wiring to figuring out what gauges we want to use, and I'm replacing all the gauges, which I'll also explain. I couldn't save any of them. That the ones that were nice I couldn't save, and the rest weren't worth it. So we're starting over from scratch. So I'll show you what we're going to do for that. Hopefully I won't bore you to death with extended wiring videos. I'm just going to try to, shoot right through that and gloss over the painful stuff. So enough talking, let's get into it. Gauges. So the original guy who built this truck used this setup. He just used the 4 holes in the face plate to run the side gauges, but the main gauges he kind of drilled out the back plate, and he had the original factory speedometer in here, which I don't know what happened to it. I'm not sure. Anyway, we're kind of gonna do the same thing, I guess, because it's easier. So we're gonna use these to mount gauges as we need them, and we're gonna mount our 2 speedometer and tachometer in here. I tried my best to reuse this tachometer. I could not. Well, I could have, but it would have been horrifically expensive, and it probably still would have bounced around a little bit and not been accurate because of the cable. So apparently getting those Stewart Warner cables these days is very cost prohibitive. I even looked at some used ones, and well, they cost a good bit. As far as backlighting, because we're putting in new gauges, we don't have to worry about all these backlights and the turn signals and high beams that would go in there. Well, I have a solution for that too, and I just use these independent lights that I'm going to run in the bezel itself. So I'll just drill a hole for the high beams up here and use the turn signals down there. And these are just screw-in LED lights. Since this is already hacked up, we really can't damage it more. I'll probably do the same thing what he did here to hold the tack in with the speedometer. I'll probably find the speedometer plate and drill it out to recess this speedometer. And when you put the cover plate on, the rest is relatively hidden because all you'll see is that back plate. You can get that perfectly centered, did he? That's fine. It doesn't have to be perfect. So I'm gonna rip all this apart and clean it up and find the speedo plate. And as far as these go, I'm going to take out these janky wires, but probably I'll have to run wires through this plate for these gauges. Probably make a separate plug for this plate to make it easy to pull and remove. This plate needs a little bit of repair. That's fine. We'll take care of that when we do that at the same time. Looks like he kind of already painted it based off of, the flakiness of it, and it needs some repair there. So let's start on this and see what we can do as far as stripping this down and cleaning it up and getting a good solid base to start from. One of the advantages to doing it this way is that we don't have to use this janky circuit board in the back with the janky plug that always fails. So that is an advantage. I'm hoping that I can cut out the direct circle here without too much damage. I think maybe I can get a hole saw, use this part as my centering pin. I don't know. So here's the original speedometer. It'll basically do the same thing that he did there. I'll gut it and I'll drill it out. Not losing much because the speedometer is essentially destroyed. So this is the tack we'll be using. It is a it'll use this sender we put on our engine Wow, looks like it was made for it. Okay. Okay, I can go with that. It's a little bit down, but that's fine. We'll obviously have to trim out these when we go to do that. That's fine as well. I might not actually have to trim out the back plate. I just have to trim these out because I think the speedometer might be the same depth. So we'll just plug that in when the time comes. This button sets the pulse, and of course it has a built-in backlight, and then this screws on the back to hold it in place. So that'll be easy enough. I'm not going to put that in yet because we're going to want to paint this up not real nice, but nicer. Let's get this set up for the speedometer. So since I'm going to try to reuse this and use this with gauges in here, I've done some patching here and up here. I have to re-drill that since it was so blown out. What did he do there? Is he hacked in there for a gauge to fit? Well, that's fine. But I also have to take off all the loose paint. Looks like this was repainted. All this loose flaking stuff. All this stuff has to come off, and this has to be cleaned up really good if we want any kind of paint to stick to it. I have some silver paint. I can redo the lettering there. So I think that's white, but I'll probably use silver. Anyway, I have to sand this down a little bit to match and drill that out. Let's take care of that and see if we can make this look a little better. So one of the things I'm going to do, since I'm not going to be using the factory gauge cluster behind here, I need to put these turn signals in. I'm going to put them in the original holes, and then I have a high beam switch I've got to put in up here. I'm going to drill these out. These are 0.31, so probably a 3/8 hole is what they're intended for. So I'm going to drill all those out ahead of time before I go through, and I'm going to give this a respray once I have her cleaned up. Well, my tailgate needs to be a little bit more black, so let's just paint her right here. Messy? Yep. Black? Yep. Done. Yep, I'll just shut her right in the paint booth there and she'll dry right out. Okay, we have this front bezel kind of gussied up just a little bit. So this is what we're gonna look like, you know, kind of when you're sitting there. Not bad. I need to figure out something for this shift plate. The way they do it when you have a manual transmission and they block this off, the way they do it is the plastic comes across here and they put like a piece of black tape on the back of the plastic and it covers up that hole. In this case, we're gonna have, I mean, when you're sitting up here, you're gonna be able to see down there, so I'm not sure the best way to do that. I could tape it, but it's gonna look like tape, so not sure about that yet. We're gonna have plenty of room back here for our gauges. This is how it sits against the bezel. Screws in to these locations. I think it's just these three where it screws into the plastic backing. So these where the turn signals are going to go through, the wiring's going to be a little tricky there because you're going to have to guide the bezel down in there. I had considered cutting out the white plastic so you could slide it in easier, but I'm not sure I'm going to do that yet. I'm just kind of test fitting at this point. The high beams should be fine. We've got plenty of room back there for them. Just got to figure out the turn signals. Alternatively, I could block them off and put them somewhere else, like up here, but I don't really want to though. But we can fit gauges in here now. We can put our vent back in. When we get to that point, maybe give this some silver paint. I don't know if I'll do that till after it's in the truck or not. It might be final touch up because it's, you know, going to be fully exposed. We got a long way to go yet before we're going to be ready to install this thing. I got to figure out what I'm going to do for the turn signals there. Alright, so as much as I abhor hacking this thing up, it was hacked up long before I got to it, as you can see. And there's not much going back from that. So yeah, I just cut out the bottoms here. I don't ever intend to have a automatic transmission in this vehicle, so no indicator needed, and if we would, there would be a floor shift. Now when we put these in, the turn signals, we can just slide them in here, and we can leave wiring connectors or whatever there for the turn signals to make this kind of easily removable. Make that as part of the wiring harness. Okay, so I have this capped off with a piece of plastic and just quick ran some paint over it. You know, it'll look fine from a distance. I want to explain real quick about these gauges. So originally when I got this thing, the air and vacuum gauges were down here on a separate plate below the steering wheel, like something somebody had made, along with some of the diesel controls like glow plugs and I think the air horn, and there was something else that I never identified. I didn't care that much to identify it. So they got around having 6 gauges that way, with 4 up here and 2 down here. So the add-on were vacuum and air pressure. So you need vacuum, air pressure, fuel, and then oil temp and voltage or ammeter. They had an ammeter, I think. Yep, there's the old, I just used a, fire hazard ammeter. And I could have reused the ammeter, but I much prefer voltage gauges because they tell me a little bit more about what's going on with the engine than just an ammeter. So anyway, I needed to get some combo gauges, and I also kind of wanted them to match. If you notice, originally I was going to reuse like the tachometer that had a chrome trim ring, and so I was kind of matching everything to that tachometer because I was going to reuse it. But then when I started buying some gauges like these with the chrome rings, and I should have just gone black like this, which I'll explain why that one's black in a second. Anyway, so I needed to combine multiple gauges into one of these to get 6 gauges into 4 pods, obviously. You can get some combo gauges like tack and, oil pressure, or tack and fuel, things like that. And I know, and you can get some other combo gauges in here. Not so much in the 3 1/4. I think this is 3 1/4. It's hard to find what I needed. So my specifications were, I didn't want a tack that went up to like 7,000 RPM because this is a diesel. So I needed like a 4,000 RPM tack. 5,000 max was my max when I was looking at them, and I couldn't get the combo gauges in that tack range. So then I had to get tack and just settle for a tack with an hour meter, and then the speedo by itself. And again, I didn't want like 120 mile per hour speedometer, because you'd never use the top half of it in this truck. It just seemed kind of pointless. So, and I still wanted them to match all at the same time while I'm getting these gauge qualifications, and then some of these had to be combo gauges to make it work. And well, the end result, this is what we ended up with. And I know some of them are cheap gauges, and I don't know how long they'll last, but this is what we're going with for now. So this is black because it's really hard to find a vacuum gauge that's just a vacuum gauge. It's not boost or anything, and also that doesn't cost like $100 for just one gauge. So it had to be relatively affordable and cheap, and it had to be digital, because I wanted all these to be digital so that I could easily remove this. I can make a wiring harness. These all have plugs back here. I can make a wiring harness and pull this off and unplug it if I need to work on it, rather than fighting with an air line and a vacuum line and all that other business. And anybody who works on this in the future will hopefully thank me for that, even if they curse the fact that I got cheap gauges. So we have a standard fuel gauge that's made for the ohm range of what I think is this tank, what the factory sender should be anyway. And I haven't put the bed on the truck yet, so if the sender isn't right, we can always swap it off. Pretty easy. So we've got combo, temp, oil, and voltage up here, and it's all digital number readouts. And we ended up with a digital readout, and it'll kind of work, I think. I believe that all of these have the same backlighting capability, or they have multiple backlights that you can switch to match. So from that regard, they'll kind of flow together. They won't look completely out of place. That hopefully is my very overcomplicated explanation for these gauges and why they are the way they are and why they don't quite match, but they're the best I could do on the budget that I have, and hopefully they will do the job. This is what we're going with right now. As far as room in the back, these gauges are fairly shallow because they're electronic, so we should have plenty of room. Some of them have plug-ins. These two have their own plugs, and the other two have wires. And what we're going to do is plug those in and make one wiring harness, because a lot of these, like power and ground, are all going to be spliced together. And then we can disconnect fewer wires if we have to disconnect this gauge cluster. So this section is going to have its own wire pigtail coming out, and the intersection here is going to have its own wire pigtail, because they're pulled separately. Don't pull them really all at once, because you have to pull this off to get the screws to pull the white plastic bezel behind it. So I got to put in the turn signals and the high beam light, and then I believe we will have this like ready for test fitting and everything. So let's see how well those fit. Okay, there is high beams and turn signals. So yeah, now all we got to do is wire all this up, basically. So just like a regular gauge cluster, we're going to have, all these grounds are going to get tied together. We're going to have a high beam activation. We're going to have turn signal activations left and right. And then a lot of these power and grounds and the lights are going to get tied together. So we're going to have our sender wires and power and ground, and then lights basically out into one harness. So this is what our cluster is going to look like on a rough fitting. And like I said, there's plenty of room for wiring back here and to run these harnesses up and over and through here. And then down here, the turn signal lights go into the slots that are cut out for them. Let's see what we can do for bringing some sort of semblance to order for this wiring. Okay, so I have brought some order to the chaos. So I've wrapped the bulbs, the LEDs for turn signals and high beams, and this is an acceptable path because then we can put the bezel on here. I basically got a pigtail with everything labeled. That is going to go into a junction block, I've decided, I think, and that way it'll be easily disconnectable for service. So this fits on here like that. You can see how the turn signals fit back there. This will go through the gap between these two. It'll go like this, and then back to the junction block. That'll be mounted back here somewhere on either the firewall or the dash structure. Haven't figured that out yet. And then these will be a separate harness plug and the tack. I have to make the pigtails for that, I guess, because that doesn't come with a plug. So we're getting there. When we get the junction block, it'll be a strip, and we'll just plug each corresponding connector into it, and that'll keep them separated and everything without too much effort. And it'll keep them organized and visually appealing, even though they won't be visible. Well, I have the main gauges done here with their pigtail. So this is way longer than it technically needs to be on both of these. And I did this on purpose because if you've ever fought in a gauge cluster, you'll understand, because you kind of got to balance it around the steering wheel and balance the plugs and everything all at the same time. Well, this way, you can kind of hold it off to the side and you'll be able to handle your electrical connections and plugs and then set it up into place without having to worm everything all in at the same time. And I will make sure that the GPS connection is long enough to do that with as well. And of course, all of our standard labels. So I think we're about ready. The only thing I'm waiting on is the junction block, and then we will be ready to proceed with the gauge install and testing. Alright, so we're going to use a terminal block like this with spade connectors so that everything is easily accessible and removable. And you will be able to access it from here if you pull this vent out when it's in, but you'll see what I mean. Anyway, we're going to plug these harnesses in separately. Basically, I've labeled them here, and they're also labeled on the wires, but this way I don't have to read each wire as I go. And of course that gap is the one between the two cluster sections. So I've got to plug this one in because it's going to be hard to get to it when it's behind this, and then I'll put the other one in. Alright, well, looks like I made this pigtail just long enough because you can set it here. So now we'll put this in. Don't forget to plug in the GPS connector to the speedometer. Get these in the lower sections, and then we can start maybe screwing some of this in, at least till we find something that's wrong and have to take it all apart again. Okay, there wasn't as much of an air gap here as I thought, so I just notched down to this hole. That's fine. The wires will just feed through there, so we can screw this in, at least till we find something wrong, and then we can mount this up to it. Alright, so I'm not going to screw this in yet, but you can see how well this grommet is going to work in there, and still have it aligned, the holes there. I still have to put in the tabs to hold the screws in there, and it's a little tight because of the grommet, but that's fine. Our windshield washer switch will work. Not perfectly aligned, but actually that's not bad, because when you're sitting up here you want it down a little bit so you can see it. If it's lined up straight on, it might be covered by this bezel a little bit. So that's good. I'm not going to screw this down or anything until we actually have time to test it. So yeah, that's the gauge cluster. Not too bad. Okay, I think I got the grounds resolved. I had run the gauge cluster grounds through the original ground that was supposed to be coming to the gauge cluster, but now I just ran it direct to the ground terminal over there. So now we have some gauges. So they have all zeroed out. I have to set the ranges of some of them. This one is not zeroed out. It's hunting for a GPS signal. It says we're 102, 12.4 volts, 0 psi. That's about right. 0 air psi. It says the fuel level is a little over half, which, yeah, okay, I gotta find the calibrations for those and the tach, because the calibration buttons are on the back. So I gotta figure that out. Oh, it must have calibrated. We got 0 miles. Okay, so it looks like this one works, this one works, this one needs calibrated. This one, don't know what's going on there. Not getting power or something. I had used completely soldered connections when I put this together, so I don't know what's going on there. All right, let's find the calibration sheets and see what we can do there. All right, so one of the downsides of buying cheap gauges is understanding the instructions. So it says, I'm going to translate this out of Chinesium. Users could select the input resistance as down below. Operations: if you have fuel, water, sewage type of gauge, hold the mode button for 3 seconds to enter the setting mode. Backlight flickering for a while. Don't know what that means. The needle point at the E position, you can select the corresponding parameter. Okay, so I think we're looking for 0 to 190, so we need to hold it for 3 seconds and then press the button until we reach 190. Okay, where's the button? There's the button. So 1, 1000, 2, 1000, 3, 1000. Okay, here's 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and then how do we get out of the mode? No, oh, it's automatically. Okay, so that looks more accurate, because I only have about, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 gallons in there maybe. So I think that's pretty accurate actually. Okay, I think that's the only one that we have to calibrate on this set. So we have to get to the tach. Okay, let's figure out, let me find that spec sheet and do that now. Okay, so translating all this, as near as I can determine from what I can get off the internet, what they mean by a speed ratio is pulses per revolution. We never say a speed ratio when we're talking about a Hall sensor, but I don't know, it's a strange term to use. I mean, yeah, I mean, what they're saying is because if you have like an 8-cylinder, you're going to have 4 pulses per revolution output from the distributor, I guess, or something like that. But I don't know why they just can't say pulses per revolution. So let's, I guess, set this to 16. Okay, I'll hook the battery up again. Disconnecting it because I don't want to burn this rig to the ground. Okay. So I should be able to come around the back here and hold it for 3 seconds. Why is it doing that? Okay, I believe I have that right. Oh yeah, okay, the H. So H equals 16. So that's a little bit tricky there because every time you release it or click it, it starts going up or down accordingly. And if you release it for 3 seconds, it'll revert back to its setting. So I think that's, and then we have to figure out the vacuum gauge. What is going on Okay, we can put this in, I think, because this vacuum gauge is probably just going to be a power issue. Take a look at that, and then, yeah. All right, let's put this in and then take a look at our last remaining problem child. All right, so pinned out here, I do get 12. It's negative because I just have the leads reversed, but no, the wiring's right. Must be a problem with the gauge. Fantastic. All right, so I still have nothing. Pressing this button does nothing. There's nothing on the back. I don't know. I guess the gauge is shot. I guess I will have to contact the seller, I suppose. I take a couple seconds to, they go through their needle sweep. This one on restart seems to find the GPS satellite pretty good, even with the sender down there on the floor. So I guess I can put that sender wherever I want. I'll probably put it up under the dash pad once I figure out where the speaker is going to go and how much room that's going to take up, or, put it up. I don't know. I think it has a sticky pad. I can put it right in the center of the windshield maybe. Anywho, that we can figure out later. For right now, we got good, solid gauges. I don't like that there's a blemish in the hour meter on that one, but you get cheap stuff, that's what you get. Alright, so that's the gauges. We're going to get into the wiring, like I said earlier in the video, separate. That's going to be its own video, and all the other things we need to do to get this thing up and running. And they're coming. I am working on this. I got sidetracked by a bunch of other different projects that needed done, but we are working on this in the background, so it hasn't been abandoned. Don't worry. If you want to see those coming up, feel free to like, subscribe, leave a comment down below, and as always, thanks for watching.